our lives inside. Either in traffic at work or close eyes. How about we all agree that it's way overdue to take back our lives? I can work wherever now. You can work wherever now. Take your guard and let it down, 'cause you can work wherever now.
What's up, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Work Wherever podcast. We're in a new studio, so if you can see me on YouTube or Facebook or wherever you guys are listening, you'll notice that I'm in a studio. So that's exciting. So I have a full-built studio now. It's in my house, so you're probably still going to hear my children, dogs, or anybody else making noise because I'm still in my house because I work from home. So I don't really have I don't have total privacy here, but I do have a studio, and we're very excited about it. Shout out to my team and everybody who made this happen. Sydney, thank you so much for getting this, and to my wife and kids for giving me a space where I can work wherever. I do have a guest here today. If you guys are watching me, you can see this is Charlie, my cat. He has made this studio his hangout over the last couple months that he has been that we've been building this thing together. So he has made it his home. So I figured, why not allow him to just kick it here with me for our first podcast while he sits here. So guys, today we're going to talk about the future of working wherever and what it means for potential cities, what it means for the way that we build houses, what it means for the way that we build communities. But also we're going to look at it from a sense of, has this been a trend? Like, is this bubble going to burst, or is this something that is potentially going to accelerate even more so than it already has? There is the resistance to go full remote. There are the old school train of thought people who believe that you should roll up your sleeves and get back to the office and put in a 9 or 10 hour day at the office, and that's the way that you have to work, and that's the only way that you can be productive. There are some dangerous thought leaders in that industry that are pushing that narrative, and I would lean on the fact that the people who are pushing that narrative from a thought leader perspective are doing it for either one reason would be that they're a politician and they want and think that the economy can only go about it in a certain way of running. So they need their cities, they need their people in the streets, they need people in the office buildings, because entire economical structures are built around people being in office spaces, which is not a bad argument. The second person who's saying that you cannot be productive from home are the managers who have spent their entire lives doing something a very specific way. And they have risen up the ranks, and they have gotten to a place in their career where they only know how to do business one way, and it's their way, and you're going to do it my way or get out. And they're reluctant to change, even though it's quite possible that change and innovation got to them to where they are. They were just innovating against somebody else's thoughts and ideas, and now their thoughts and ideas they want to keep. They don't want to move away from their own ideals and where they've been, and they want to maintain that place going forward. Some of these people are using the return to the office right now as a potential for a layoff, so be careful of those trends. We saw that with Tesla and Elon Musk, where Elon said that everybody has to return back to the office and you can pretend to work somewhere else. That was the quote that he posted out, or the tweet, or whatever it was. And then I think it was like 7-10 days later, he laid off 10% of Tesla employees. So you could look at that to say he was already going to lay people off, and he wanted to see how many people he had to lay off by making sure that he brought everyone back, or made the claim that he wanted everybody back, so that they would resign, go elsewhere, put in their 2 weeks, whatever, and then he would not have to lay off a much larger number to tip off any shareholders or anything like that to make it seem like they're hurting right now. So those are kind of the different areas. Now, could it be a trend where we see different organizations that are going to start mandating people to come back to the office and then laying people off? I think so. I think that is going to be a trend going forward. I think Elon, he set that trend, and I think that we're going to see it. It's going to be part of like the blue book, so to speak, or the blueprint going forward for big organizations who say we're going to lay people off, mostly probably around the manufacturing industries, because Tesla is a tech company at its core. At least that's what Elon has always said. So most tech organizations are not going to be telling their people to come back. And if there are a tech organization out there that says for the people to come back, like Microsoft or AWS or Amazon or name a tech, Google, any of those organizations, if they start bringing their people back, then look out for layoffs. That's all I have to say about that. But let's talk about the initial two. Let's talk about the politicians and thought leaders as to trying to protect their cities and their businesses. Let's talk about that, and then let's talk about the old school train of thought, the people who are afraid of technology. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So the first group, the politicians, and that's where we'll start. And so the way that our current economy is built is it's built around this idea that cities are the epicenter of business. That New York, formerly San Francisco, LA, Seattle, Chicago, if you wanted a good job, you had to move to these big cities, Dallas, Washington, D.C., and if you didn't move to these cities, then you risked not making it out of your town, right? Or you missed not earning enough money to make a good living. And it forced people from rural areas to migrate out. Maybe people who really enjoyed living in rural America or small town USA or on a farm or different areas within the United States that weren't a major city, right? There wasn't a suburbia, or it wasn't a more urban area. So it forced them to move to New York. I can't tell you how many friends that I have that moved to New York. I would never do it. I am pretty anti-New York. I never had to do it for my career. I never had to move to a specific city. I have had to commute I'm in the D.C. area. I'm in the suburbs of D.C. I was about 9 miles south, and I have since moved further and further and further away. But I did have to use to take the train into the city or commute in and around Washington, D.C. in the beginning of my career. And that was just the thought process. I had to put in my dues. I had to do that in order to move up the chain of the ladder, to learn the things that I know now. And a lot of the work that I did was in and for the federal government, so a lot of that information had to be kept in a secret environment or a secure, classified environment where I couldn't necessarily work from home all the time. But since 2019, and notice I said 2019 and not 2020, because since 2019, the numbers have drastically increased in terms of remote workers. 2019 was actually a peak time that a lot of studies went out predicting future of work was a remote. That there were multiple 2019 studies that went out. Forbes, U.S. Employee Workforce, Global Workforce Analytics, Citrix, a lot of them published 2019 polls and reports. Microsoft released one in 2018 stating that this was going to be the trends and this was going to be the future. So before the pandemic even happened, a lot of organizations and a lot of polls were already starting to make these moves. And we saw this with a lot of cities post Silicon Valley. So Silicon Valley was kind of the early 2010s where people were flooding to San Francisco, flooding to California to be in and around Silicon Valley so that they could build up their technology. This led to what some people would call Silicon Hill, which here in Washington, D.C., a lot of people who were pre-Silicon Valley, a lot of people who came up in that boom, then moved to Washington, D.C. and became contractors to the government so the government could pick their brains to accelerate the modern warfare technologies. That all happened basically between 2009-ish, 2015 that's kind of the boom area, and then that started to de-escalate as more and more people started having the capabilities to work wherever they wanted and took advantage of that, and that's what led to all these 2018, 2019 type polls. So since 2009, so between 2009 and 2019, there was a rise of 159% of total work wherever, work from home, remote work employees. There was a 159% increase. There was a total of 62% of employees aged 22 to 65 saying at least they occasionally worked remote. So there was already those trends. This already started to affect cities. You already saw Silicon Valley start to disperse. You already saw New York start to disperse. Pre-COVID, New York was already starting to kind of lose a little bit of steam. But not seeing the innovation of the people who are working wherever, these cities still building up and building out to become the epicenter for business. At least that's how they prided themselves. That's how they beat their chest. That's when the crash of 2020 really, really affected these cities, and I believe that a lot of these cities won't come back. So before I get any deeper into my thought processes around the economy and the way that work wherever and work from home employees are going to change the economy and how the economic landscape and how we view cities and epicenters and stuff like that, before we get into that, I'm going to address the other side of the table. The other side of the table are the managers who have lived their entire lives a specific way, disrupting whatever the old processes were, climbing up the ladder, becoming in charge, building an entire career around doing it their way in a very specific way, and now they're faced with the potential to innovate or potentially lose control of what is happening. So they're grasping for what they know and grasping for what they understand. But these managers are at danger for losing a lot more than they'll gain by sending their people back. One, they lose the potential to lose their top performers. It's no secret a lot of the top performers are bouncing around, moving from different businesses right now. They're jumping around, whereas there's always been kind of a move for top performers, but now we're seeing it so much that, which I talked about it on one of my episodes with Katrina, where you're calling it the Great Recession, or what is it? Regression? What is it? Resign? Great Resign? I don't know what it's called. But we're seeing the Great Realignment, I believe, is what Katrina called it. Hopefully, we don't go back to a Great Recession. That'd be pretty bad. But we're seeing this Great Resignation. There's the word, or the Great Realignment, or the Great Resigning, whatever you want to call it. It's been called multiple things, except the Great Recession. Whatever you call it, it is it's more and more of your top performers leaving. But now it's not only so much as only your top performers. Now it's maybe those mid-level performers as well. Maybe now we're seeing an increase across the board, low, middle, and high performers jumping around simply for the fact that they want to work from home, that they don't want to go back to the office. That's part of it. A new sense of purpose, belonging, dedication to self is also part of this as well. Over the last 2 years, we've had a lot of time with our own thoughts and a lot of time thinking as to what's most important to us, and a lot of us are now realizing that whatever we're doing, whether it's the career, the business, the position, coworkers, doesn't align with our personal beliefs, doesn't align with our core values, doesn't align with who it is that we believe we are. or what our purpose is. And so business leaders who send everybody back immediately risk disrupting that flow within their own employees. Now, unless you ask them, right? Poll your employees. We had Katrina come on and talk about that. That was episode 1 of the Work Wherever podcast, if you want to go back and listen to what she had to say about that. So make sure that you're talking to your employees. So that's the first thing that you risk as a manager who isn't innovative. The second is financial risk. So you spent a lot of money probably over the last 2 years on new technology, new things, new subscriptions, new hardware, new ways of doing business. And if you go back to the old way and you just pretend that's 2019, you're essentially throwing a lot of that technology out the door. That's one way that you're going to be potentially losing a lot of money, because a lot of those subscriptions aren't as easy as cancel this month. A lot of the hardware, a lot of the software, a lot of the licensing keys, a lot of the processes, a lot of the things that you spent a lot of money on over the last couple of years are not as simple as, okay, I'm done, I'll turn it off at the end of the month, and then we won't have to pay for it again. It's not always that simple. Sometimes it is. You can cancel certain software subscriptions. That's the whole model of software as a service. You pay a monthly subscription, turn it off at any time. But what about the processes, the way that you've done business, the consultants you've paid over the last couple of years, the ways that you've reorganized your business in order to innovate and make it through the last 2 years? That cost money too. That was a lot of sweat equity and real financial numbers that you placed within your business to uplift it to a position where you could work remote. So are you able to go away with that and do away with that and say that you're okay with losing, or calling that just a stopgap over the last couple of years? Maybe you are, maybe you're not. Other financial risk that you take is your overhead, because a 50% remote worker saves a company on average $11,000 a year annually. That's a half-time remote employee. Saves $11,000 for the company per employee. So that is your kitchen at work. That is your travel reimbursements. That is a whole lot of things. Electricity, desk seating, tools that they need to do their job here at the office, office supplies, monitors, computer repairs. There are a whole number of financials that go into that. $11,000 per year per employee for half. So in theory, that number would double to $22,000 for a full-time remote employee. That's how math generally works. The study was only done for a half-time remote employee, so we'll stick with the $11,000 number. So you potentially lose $11,000 per employee that you bring back full-time to the office. So that is a lot to gamble. So you have the top performers that you could lose. That would hurt production. You have the financial impact, losing $11,000 per half-time employee. So you have those two very huge ways that it could hurt your business. And the third way that it could hurt your business is lack of innovation, because you're essentially trying to turn back the time back to 2019. So that is always a dangerous thing. You should be thinking of the next 5 years, not how you can get your business back to how it was in 2019. 2019 is gone. 2020 is gone. 2021 is gone. Guess what? 2022 is about to be gone soon. So you should be thinking about 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, right? Those are the next 5 years. Maybe even thinking 2028 as to where you're going to position yourselves for that year. That's how you should look at technology innovation, your trends, your competitors, the way that you want to stay ahead. And if they're all trending remote, then you risk even a greater impact of the 3 points that I aforementioned. Losing top performers, so those who are thinking ahead, the financial loss of trying to build around a trend that is not headed in the direction that you want it to go, right? And then, obviously, not thinking ahead means that you will fall behind your competition, which means you're probably going to end up falling behind in terms of your numbers and goals. So those are three huge impacts from the managerial perspective. I will add one more statistics to this, a couple more statistic lines to this. 62% of employees say that they could work remote. That means it's already in the majority of your employees' heads, that they're saying, hey man, I already could do this, so why can't I? Right? So that is something that you should keep in mind as you move forward. So let's revert back to the economic input, and let's put our tinfoil hats on here for a second, maybe, and let's talk about a world that is post office spaces. Let's say that, and I know some of these are kind of high thinking, future thinking types of ideas, and it's really maybe not a realistic thing in the next year or so, but play with me for a second. If cities are no longer the epicenter, and Wi-Fi and high-speed internet is readily available to all persons in the United States, because those are the key factors here. The only way you can really work wherever is with high-speed internet. And so that doesn't always come in the fashion of a hotspot, because hotspots are not always reliable everywhere, which we're about to test a couple hotspots on our YouTube channel. So if you want to check those out, we are going to do a couple different tests using 3 different Wi-Fi methods. But anyways, so that's the assumptions we're playing with. That cities are losing their people and have no longer become the epicenter for business. And everywhere, at least the majority of places in the United States, have high-speed internet available to them. If that is the case, then the amount of production somebody can do from anywhere in the world drastically increases. And people will no longer leave their rural areas, their suburban areas become even more, maybe not suburban, maybe they're like sub-rural, right? I don't know if sub-rural is a thing, but they're closer to the rural side than they are to the city side, because being close to a city doesn't necessarily matter anymore. So now what we will start to see is a new type of economy form, where cities, communities, developments, the way that we build our houses all completely change. Now, instead of the center of a community being a metro station or a bus stop or something along those lines, and now it becomes an internet cafe or some sort of a high-speed internet type of office space, maybe like a remote office space or a co-working environment. These become more of the type of developments that are built around suburban areas and developments. And then we have the houses themselves. A lot of the people who are looking for houses now have changed their buying and their thought process as to say, well, yeah, we need, if you have 1 kid or 2 kids, let's say you have 2 kids. It's you and your husband or wife. You have 2 children. And so maybe before you were looking for a 3-bedroom place. People now are looking for 4 bedrooms because they want that built-in work-from-home environment. So think about the future of developments, homes, cities, suburban areas, rural development areas, where you have more and more of these type pod work-from-home dedicated office space developments. These are the types of the futures that we're gonna start to see as members start to flood out of cities. Now, a lot of this will take time, but probably not as much time as you think. So as you look to the future, look at those trends. Are developments starting to build out in a way that the center is around high-speed internet, productivity, co-working spaces, internet cafes, or are these developments still focused on public transportation? Because the public transportation thought process is, we need to get you into the city. The co-working spaces, the high-speed internet developments, those are, you can stay where you are and be productive. 2 very different trains of thoughts. Look for those trends in your areas. So this will play very difficult for some of the major cities in the United States. We're already starting to see San Francisco have a really hard time. We're starting to see New York have a really, really hard time. And they're running these ads around, stay, come visit, do this, do that, to try and get people back to the cities. I just don't see it happening. I don't think that people are going to flood back to the cities. I wouldn't pay $2,000 to live in a 400 or 500 square foot apartment in New York. I never will. Never would, really. I never was a big fan of cities to begin with. I think you're going to see more acreage. And now you're talking about a thought process of Americans where people are starting to see the acreage shortage, where there are these thought processes, long term, of course, that, there isn't enough land to go around. So you could see a trend of people buying up more and more acreage and buying as much land as they possibly can, and then moving further and further away. You see this a little bit over the last couple of years. I believe it was 2018 or 19. West Virginia offered to pay Washington, D.C. residents $12,000 to come live in West Virginia. It was only for D.C. commuters. So if you were commuting to D.C. or had a main office place in Washington, D.C., they would pay you $12,000 a year to live there. So certain states and certain areas are already playing to this come by acreage, be a remote worker. You're going to start to see more and more of it. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this show. We talked about a whole lot. Remember, don't be afraid of this work wherever trend. It might be a little difficult for you as an organization. It might be a little difficult if you have your economics and your income built around office spaces that used to be booming back in 2018-19. But I would challenge you to innovate and look for new ways, new revenue streams, and understand these trends, these city plannings, these economic trends, these business trends. Look into them. Look 5 years ahead. That's going to be your savior here. That's what's going to propel your business to the next level. And if you're a remote worker, don't give back your power. Right now, you have the power as a remote employee. You can tell somebody, no, I'm not coming back to the office. I did it back in 2015. I was like, I'm not coming back. Like, okay, well, but this person, no, I'm not coming back. Okay, I understand. They can't necessarily fire you for if you can't do your job and you're not producing from home, I don't recommend you telling your boss that you're not going to come back, or a client you're not going to come back. But if you're producing and there's no leverage to say that you have to come back other than a button a seat, don't give up that leverage, because this is a time right now where the employees hold a lot of the power, and you guys have the opportunity to flex that as a benefit, as a perk. Write it into contracts, ask for it. Whereas the negotiation prior to 2020 was, how many days off am I going to get? I would write into your clause, how many days do I have to go into the office? Not how many days am I going to work from home? How many days am I going to have to go into the office? That is what needs to be the new discussion. So guys, thanks for hanging out. This has been my first episode of the Work Wherever podcast in the new studio. And I thought it was fun. I like the studio. This is kind of comfy chair. So Charlie must have enjoyed it, or he didn't, because he looks like he fell asleep. But guys, thanks for hanging out, and until next time, guys, see you.
How about we all agree that it's way overdue to take back our lives?